Brian, one thing that came up to me while we were discussing back and forth, and I was listening to your example, was there was a book that I read not that long ago called "Words That Change Minds" by Shel Rose Charvet, and she was talking about there's 14 different ways that us as individuals, and again, whether we're purchasing products or whether we're just communicating to others, there's 14 different ways that other people are listening and communicating in. And so I just wonder if, looking back or even knowing that information, do you think that there was a way that you could have spread that information, said it differently, that way they would have heard you maybe a little bit differently?
For sure. Yeah. And that's a very interesting topic, and I'd love to read that book. I am not totally surprised to hear there's 14 different ways, but it's totally believable just based on my personal life experience, because I think a lot of people hear the same message in very different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, from us, we can take that from a marketing and selling standpoint that, hey, whenever we're talking to people on the phone, or whether we're pushing our product out there, we can't just say it the same way over and over again. We have to be able to speak to all the different ears that are listening to us. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to say each thing 14 different ways. That's not it. We should know based upon our demographic, who's listening to us, and especially if we're talking to coworkers, their peers, we should know who we're communicating with and how they're communicating. And so, I've always heard that it's on the job of the communicator. And so for me, that's one thing that I mean, as you spoke at in the beginning of the podcast, is doing so much due diligence on how can I communicate better, because again, if I can explain this more thoroughly, it takes a lot of headache out of the way.
Yeah, it certainly does. And I mentioned it earlier, the more it's a relationship, the more intimately familiar you are with those people you work with, the better you're going to communicate with them, the better they're going to hear what you have to say, and the better you're going to hear what they have to say to you.
And I think it's the job of the leader to create a culture of listening and a culture of feedback, Brian, so that I know I can trust you as a leader, that even if it's negative feedback, you want to hear it. And I feel like it's your job as a leader to create a market where I can sell you my feedback, versus you having to swim upstream all the time like a salmon, right? You can get upstream, but that's the hard way to go. And a lot of salmon don't make it. So I feel like it's a two-sided conversation, and it's a two-sided miracle. And the miracle is when you have the culture that is there to support feedback, and B, the courage of the employee to give the feedback. In this case, you had the courage, you didn't have the culture.
I think that's right. And the culture of the team comes down from the leader. So even in a microcosm, a leader of a small team can create a great culture inside his or her team. When the rest of the culture is very negative, it's a very hard thing to do. I have been in that situation too. And it's very tough on the leader, but that you can create winning teams by creating that environment where feedback is welcome, where communication is open, and people don't feel like they're going to get stomped on the first time they come up with an idea, even if it's a crazy one. And it may legitimately be a crazy idea, but you know what? Hear them out and talk about it, to discuss it in a rational way.
Great. Appreciate it.
And maybe to kind of wrap things up here, Brian, Howie, really speaks a lot about on his LinkedIn and things like that about, empowering others and really speaking out. But there's always, just like your circumstance, what if they don't listen to me? What if they don't hear what I have to say? Wouldn't it be better to say nothing? Now, in my opinion, I have a follow-up, and I think we can each go around and answer that question. But in your opinion, Brian, wouldn't it be better to say nothing? What is your response to that?
So I think that is not to pass the buck, but it's somewhat of a personal decision, because there will be weight that comes with that decision, whether you decide to stay quiet or you decide to speak. And each individual has to make that decision. But I think in the vast majority of cases, the right thing to do, the thing that should be done, is for your voice to to be spoken, whether it's heard or not.
Howie?
Oh man, I'm glad you said that. I feel like if you have the visibility to see the issue as an employee, it's your job to do your best to articulate that to management. And you set up a 15-minute chat with them. Normally they'll take a meeting like that if you have to, because Jordan mentioned earlier, Beastmode mentioned earlier about the fact that people have different learning styles and listening styles. Fine, put it into PowerPoint, put 4 slides together, but try to make the message as palatable as possible, and don't lose them in the delivery. But yeah, I feel like I agree with what Brian says. You really have a responsibility, and of course it's individual, and there may be circumstances where you can't, but if at all possible, you've got to share what you're seeing.
100%.
And I firmly agree with both of you guys that you have to share. We all come across these lines in the sand that we have to find out. We talked about it last week, that the positive gains of saying something and having it heard far outweigh the negatives of not being heard. Because Brian just matriculated. He told us, that he said something, it wasn't heard, but look at how many life lessons he's learned. Look at what he's grown to be where he is now, but he wouldn't have had any of that growth without stepping up to that plate, without facing that giant. And that's something that I think we all need to take away from. I think that we all go through that at one point in time, at one job or another. And so it's just, really stepping up and saying, here's an opportunity. Let's see what happens. If I fail, I fail. And if not, it's a great opportunity.
True.
Big shout, big amen.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much. Howie, it's always great. And until next week, guys, thank you so much.
Thanks.
All righty, guys.